This is Steve Zeltzer with KPFA WorkWeek Radio, and I'm with General Secretary Irvin Jim, who's the General Secretary of the National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa, one of the most powerful unions in all of Africa. Welcome to WorkWeek Radio. So, Irvin, why don't you talk about the conditions that South African workers face today, particularly mass unemployment and your workers in the industries that your union represents?
Well, today we signed an agreement in the engineering sector without a strike. We obviously have been severely affected by the global crisis of capitalism. But not only that, I mean, the South African economy has been facing serious challenges in that it has been an economy that has been unable to deliver a better life to the majority of the people. And this can only be traced to the question of ownership of the economy. It is an economy that has not been transformed. Everybody knows that South African economy is constituted by minerals, energy, and finance complex. When we took over power in 1994, the ANC government adopted a very terrible macroeconomic framework, and they didn't listen to us. We rejected it when it was adopted.
That was the GEAR program?
It was the GEAR program. I mean, the devil has always been on the detail. It's about growth, employment, and redistribution. When you hear it being defined, it promises hope. But there were a couple of issues that we were concerned about. It liberalized trade faster than what was stipulated in the WTO. It removed exchange control, allowing the money to leave the country. This is money that we desperately needed to be invested in productive sectors of the economy. South African companies were allowed to go and list in London and so forth. And therefore, there has been no economic transformation. And as a union for years now, we have maintained that there was a serious need to basically undo, which we think is in the center of this crisis in South Africa. Because basically what we have in South Africa was a negotiated settlement, which the Constitution of South Africa, in as much as it gives us rights to speak honestly away from the apartheid regime, but it protects the interest of the dominant class in the economy, which was not transformed. For instance, the Land Act of 1913 has not been undone, in that 87% of the land is still in the hands of a tiny minority. And where we call for nationalization, for instance, because for us this was critical that this government needed to nationalize to all commanding heights of the economy, minerals, make sure that they are beneficiated, they are diversified to create new jobs, and ensure that you can handle fundamental issues such as making sure that education is free and compulsory, such that you can actually destroy apartheid inferior infrastructure, which by design was only meant for black people, Africans in particular, in that you needed to smash apartheid spatial development. So South Africa, basically, we have freedom, but apartheid continued by other means, in that the ANC has been given took power only to run a budget. Even that budget is not more than, it can't be more than 25% of the GDP, meaning that those who own the economy continue to own the economy. And as a result, the chicken have come home to roast. Stats SA would have released statistics this week that poverty is worsening. And you have two poles where the bulk majority of people are dying of hunger, starvation. But you got another world where tiny minority is basically swimming in wealth. And obviously, we have a situation where if you don't address the fundamentals, as I call for the property question, if you don't deal with relations of production, if you don't affirm the majority in a meaningful way, what you're likely to have is what we are now confronted with, of cronyism, of corruption. And if we are not mobilizing the working class as a class to take up class struggle as the only guarantee for change, we will soon be faced with a dictatorship.
Now, the breakup of the unions in South Africa, there have been divisions now, and there is no mass working class party. NUMSA, and that you formed a new trade union federation. Why don't you talk about the goals of the trade union federation and how you see the development of a working class party taking place in South Africa that would carry out the program you're talking about of nationalization under workers' control and redistribution of the land?
Well, NUMSA was the first union to be dismissed because we were not prepared to lie. We were very clear that what the ANC was about, together with the alliance which we were part of, as the National Democratic Revolution, for us was about a revolutionary agenda. It was about making sure that it fully implement the Freedom Charter. It was about to make sure that the questions I'm raising about ownership and control of the economy are addressed. And it was about to nationalize, not just nationalize for the sake of it, but under worker control and to champion a job-led industrial strategy. And when this was not happening, year after year, we were being called to support, and we called on our members to vote. In 2013, we said enough is enough. We said to COSATU, which is a federation that we were part of, that listen, you need to convene a COSATU Congress so that we can debate the fact that we continue to vote for an organization which continues to take policies that are basically taking bread away from our members whom we represent. For that, we were dismissed in 2014 out of COSATU, and we did everything, because for us unity of workers is important. We did everything to try and reclaim COSATU, but when we could not be able to win it back, we took a decision that yes, we'll form a new federation, which we have launched at the beginning of this year. But our 2013 Special National Congress also said the time has come that we must organize the working class as a class for itself. We must crystallize the Workers' Party. So we're not in a rush. We have now launched the new federation. We're working as NUMSA openly, frankly, even within SAFTU. We clear that to try and run after these capitalist factions that have no revolutionary agenda is not going to liberate the working class. It's high time that the working class must organize itself as a class for itself and form a workers' party, and which can champion class struggle in the interests of the working class if we are to deal with the rot of capitalism, of greed, which we have witnessed.
Now, privatization and outsourcing, which the government has been involved in, has that led to corruption within the trade union movement of union people given money or stock? And did that lead to Lonmin, the massacre in Lonmin, Mirakana in 5 years ago, was a result of corruption of the unions?
There are a couple of things that could be said. I think the first one is that I think the reality of South Africa, we were faced with a situation where, in the context of globalization, there's been this theory that says government has no business in business, which is a neoliberal agenda driven by capitalist orthodox, and basically saying, look, government has no business in business. We must allow the market to determine the course of direction. As a result of that, we witness this thing of the ANC government allowing or destroying the capacity of the state. Even during the apartheid era, there was a maize board, there was a wool board, the state was intervening in the economy. As a result, what the state did was to champion privatization, was to outsource. We actually fought against, we took struggles, we took marches against that. And as a result, what did we reap out of this outsourcing is down variation of benefits and conditions of workers, is jobs that are not paying a living wage, and it's the vulnerability of poverty that you are working but you can't take care of your family. And of course, look, I mean, if a government does not build the economy, it opens itself up with the hope that it will attract foreign direct investment permanently, and what it experienced was capital from South Africa moving out of South Africa to go to other countries, because there's no government, there's no business that control capital mobility. You end up with workers who, in Marikana, who are migrant workers, were faced with a situation where, I mean, basically they want a living wage, they demanded 12,500, and everybody knows this, that the dominant class always find expression in the state. And the state is but nothing but an organ of oppression. The reality is that we saw the true colors of the state in Marikana. Workers were occupying a mountain. The state had every capacity of the state. Those workers also were not sleeping there. They could have at night went and occupied the mountain and then dispersed them. But they didn't do that. I mean, they literally planned. There were mortuary vans and everything else. And from where from what we saw, and we're the only union that took a very firm stance not to speak English without science. We were clear that this was a massacre which was done by the ANC government, and it's a terrible precedent because that massacre, there's no guarantee that it cannot be repeated, especially in the conditions of poverty, unemployment, and poverty that are and inequalities that are continuing to worsen. I mean, children, Stats SA was releasing a report that basically the most victims is children in this country, and therefore we of the view that the future of South Africa is going to take the working class, the advanced detachment of the working class, to organize itself as a class and not be part of any ideological confusion, because it's unlike there is no resistance, but the kind of resistance we've been seeing is NUMSA, is civil society and various organizations that are coming together in as much as they are doing a right thing to say Zuma must go because we're the first to say so. But some of them, they don't want a radical economic transformation. They want to protect the status quo.
It's not just a question of Zuma, it's a system problem.
It is a system problem. That's what we need to deal with. We need to actually deal with the fact that we've got a constitution that basically protects the status quo.
And the corruption, I mean, no officials have been held accountable. There have been no court trials of these officials who were involved in this massacre. This cover-up continues. How is that going to change? Because people in South Africa feel nothing changes. These people get away with this massacre. Nothing happens to them. They're not held accountable.
Well, I'm of the view that there is a battle going on between two factions of capital.
Sounds in the United States, too. With Trump and the rest of the capital.
Yes, one faction has been dominant, which is white monopoly capital. It has captured that state. And I think they have been maneuvered by Zuma in the sense that when he took over power, obviously they didn't accept him. And therefore, he looked for an alternative capital that can resource him. And Guptas were available. And as a result, because he had power of the state, he has taken care of the SOEs. And in South Africa, if you take control of Eskom, it means you disrupt the whole minerals, energy, and finance complex. That's the crisis of capitalism. But all these factions, from where we stand, they are not championing an interest of the working class. In fact, Zuma, when he closed the ANC recent conference, he said there should be no winners and losers, because there's no ideological difference between them. It's about how do they conquer the state for them to continue to accumulate. And look, the working class, in our view, must organize itself as a class and have a revolutionary agenda and challenge the dominance of this greed that is basically taking place in the country.
Now, Gupta is selling off its industries, Lonmin, other properties. Shouldn't they be nationalized under workers' control if they're involved in a criminal corruption and criminal conspiracy?
Well, our NEC have taken that decision in the recent past that we will be making a call that all Gupta companies should be nationalized. And obviously, we must fight corruption. From where we stand, this is not one single battle in a single front. We need to mobilize against corruption. We need to make that call. But you got a situation where basically those who are part of this process occupy the state. So who's going to immediately jump on that? That's why we're saying we shouldn't be fooling ourselves. The solution can only come if the working class is organized and it pursues class struggle.
Now, in the United States, with the Trump administration, you have a racist attack, a rise of xenophobia, a rise of nationalism, attack on immigrants, and threats to invade Venezuela, threats to invade countries all over the world. And there's a rise nationally and internationally of nationalism and xenophobia and imperialist war. Now, the United States and South Africa has bases. They're bombing people all over South Africa to protect their imperial interest. How do you see uniting workers, both in South Africa and internationally, to defend the working class on a global level?
Well, I think solidarity is forever and it makes us strong. I think there is a serious need to continue to promote worker-to-worker conduct, union-to-union conduct. As a union, I think we're very pleased with the work that we've been doing. We've got a lot of comrades in the United States, in Latin America. We are in our project of challenging the dominance of imperialism. I mean, the ANC characterizes itself as a disciplined force of the left. But since 1994, imperialism has been on the rise in this country. Neoliberal policies that are not addressing the interests of the working class and the poor have become dominant. And the working class, in fact, apartheid fault lines have we are where we were. As a result, we're sitting with a crisis in the country. Individual like Trump and everybody else, there will always be opportunists who will shoot up if there is no revolutionary agenda that takes place. But all of this, I mean, tribalism, regionalism, racism, what drives that? It is about the fact that the working class is robbed broad daylight, its labor surplus value, and there is a tiny minority that continue to live at the backdrop of this grid, whilst the bulk majority, and under those conditions, I mean, capitalism is either it manipulate religion, as it will do in a number of countries, and it will in South Africa, for instance, it use race to divide and rule and to make sure that the dominant class continues to accumulate.
And you represent your members, work for Ford and multinational companies. What about the possibility of linking up multinational companies internationally so they take action collectively together and developing a communication network where these workers are all linked up internationally?
Well, we're doing that very well. We're part of a global federation called Industry All. I mean, in the United States, workers have not been allowed to join. In Mississippi, we have been working together with the workers there with Ford to stand up for solidarity, to build the international solidarity. So yes, NUMSA is part of a global federation with our sister unions within Industry All, and we must continue to champion solidarity and class struggle.
And the future of South African labor. Right now, there are different union federations, there's divisions, there isn't a united front of South African unions. How can a united front be built in South Africa, in the working class, to take on this question of privatization, union busting, and the mass poverty in South Africa of 40% unemployment?
Well, we are the first one to appreciate that we are not organizing all workers. About 70% of workers in this country are unorganized. We got COSATU, we got the new federation that has been launched. I think NUMSA will be the first one to say there's nothing so important about that surpasses the unity of workers. So this is going to take time, but workers are not fools because they get divided by individuals. The reality is that we do need the coming together of workers. Nobody knows the future. It could be that down the line you could have a confederation and begin, because I think there is no compromise about uniting workers. But the question is, unity for what? From where we stand, it must be the unity for a struggle for socialism. It must be the unity for overthrowing capitalism as a system, because capitalism as a system does not have solutions for problems that confront humanity.
Well, the major trade union federations, ICTU, are for social democracy, reforming capitalism. Do you see the need for a new international trade union formation that has that program?
My experience is that, I mean, I've been part of those platforms. What capitalism is doing very well is to hit hard those who would have thought that they can give capitalism a human face. You know, in the North, people were cushioned, and I think capitalism have demonstrated that there is no government, there's no trade union that control capital mobility. It moved from one nation state to another. What drives that movement is not to give jobs of those nation states. It is about where it can maximize profit. So the sooner all leaders of the labor movement all over the world appreciate that basically the issue here is to challenge the system of capitalism which champions greed, not humanity.
And the development of BRICS in China, in South Africa, and in Africa and around the world, what has been the effect of that, and do you see that as a solution to the economic crisis?
Not at all. I think first we should be, all of us, I mean, I would argue that as the labor movement, our focus must be to unite workers separated by rivers and forests. I have not come across with BRICS that is going to break new ground. In fact, I think it's another new center to manage, to control, and to champion further neoliberal agenda. If the working class in these countries is not coming together within BRICS, there's no BRICS that will be able to break new ground from imperialism as we know it.
And the importation of Chinese workers in South Africa, is that an issue for NUMSA and the rest of the trade union movement?
Well, we're not xenophobic. Capitalism is international. We wouldn't want to make sure that workers are given borders. But the bottom line is that with the scourge of high levels of poverty, unemployment, and inequality in South Africa, any job that we can create, we should be prioritizing the South Africans.
And you have members who can do the work that is required in South Africa.
We have a very skilled labor force.
And the infrastructure is falling apart here in South Africa, like in the United States. Shouldn't there be a mass program of infrastructure building up the country and steel workers and putting the country to make a first-rate nation?
Well, one of the things that we are debating is going to be how do we, now that there is a crisis of neoliberal agenda, how do we reconstruct this country once more? And surely you need a state that must intervene in the economy. You need to move away from a neoliberal agenda that champions belt tightening. But we've got a government that would have went to the World Economic Forum, Cyril Ramaphosa promising a further more belt tightening and everything else. That's why we're saying we need alternative. We just don't need a workers' party that will just organize the working class to talk about these things. We need a working class that will develop an agenda that will ensure that the state, basically its capacity is developed, and we can only do that if we're to impose the working class hegemony over that state for a clear developmental agenda, which must be revolutionary.
And the ILWU this coming weekend is going to be marching in San Francisco with other unions against racists, against Nazis and fascists. The unions are beginning to mobilize. What are your words to the American working class?
Well, we must.
South Africa.
We are in solidarity with them. Racism must be destroyed wherever it raises its ugly head. But the bottom line is that as long as there is inequality, as long as there is capitalism, there will always be racism.